middle of Chicago's drill era, one teenager was not just rapping about the war in his hood, he was helping write it. Before the court files, before the jailhouse leaks, his name was whispered in alleys, inside studios, and later on the tiers, tied to a body in an alley in a block that felt like a live battlefield. Some would call him a soldier, others would call him a backdoor. The state called him a murderer and sat him down on decades. Inside, his name kept popping up in gang politics, rapper beef, and county fades, even as he tried to trade a flag for faith and chase a new identity. Join us as we break down the teenage Chicago assassin who turned his block into a war zone. Leonard Anderson came into the world in Chicago on September 18, 1996, in a city where the streets already carried heavy stories. His parents split up when he was still a little kid, so most of his childhood was spent with his mother, Dedra Morris, holding the house down. She saw him as more than just another boy from the South Side. For his first birthday, she put a gold crown on his head and told everyone not to call him anything but king. That was her way of saying he was special, even if the world outside their door did not care about crowns or birthdays. Inside that apartment, Leonard was the only son, the one she poured all her hopes into, even while the blocks around them were getting rougher every year. Life inside the home and life outside were two different worlds. In the house, Dedra tried to keep things normal. She made him a homemade chocolate cake with chocolate frosting for his 17th birthday because he did not like store-bought cake and let her know it. She kept the kitchen stacked with cereal boxes because he was, in her words, a cereal fiend. He would crush bowls of Cinnamon Toast Crunch and chase it with a home run in sausage pizza. Those little details mattered to her. They were proof he was still just her boy, even as he drifted deeper into a city where kids his age were already picking sides, learning sets, and seeing guns long before they saw college. Outside the apartment, Leonard was not just a son, he was a Chicago teenager, watching a new sound grow out of his own neighborhood. Drill music, the dark, raw side of hip-hop that talked about street beef, drugs, and daily violence, caught his attention early. The lyrics did not feel like stories from somewhere else. They felt like documentaries put over beats. Like a lot of young kids in that environment, he got pulled toward that world, not just as a listener, but as someone who wanted to jump on the mic. Those tracks that talked about sliding on ops, losing homies, stacking money, and dodging shots did not scare him away. They drew him in and helped shape the name he would later carry, L.A. Capone. By the time he hit his early teens, Leonard was not hanging by himself. Around the age of 12, he became close with another kid who was already on the path to rap fame, Lil Durk. Over the years, that friendship turned serious. They stayed locked in for about 5 years, turning up in each other's lives and later in each other's videos. Just like Chief Keef and Lil Durk, Leonard stepped into the Black Disciples world, lining himself up with a set that already had a name on the streets and on the internet. On camera, you could see him with other BD rappers like Rondo No. 9 and his stepbrother Quap, throwing up signs, shouting GDK, and making it clear who their ops were. In drill language, GDK, Gangster Disciples Killer, was not just a phrase, it was a line in the sand, and Leonard was standing on one side of it. As he grew, Leonard stopped being just the kid hanging with known names and became part of something bigger. Lil Durk put together a collective called Only the Family, and L.A. Capone got brought into that circle. At the same time, he ran with Team 600, a Black Disciple set with a strong footprint and heavy problems with rival gangs. That connection made his face and name stand out more in the Chicago drill scene. Being part of 600 meant he was not just a rapper in a vacuum. He was tied into a block, into a crew, into long-running beef with Gangster Disciple sets and crews like 051 Young Money. To fans, he was an upcoming star. To the streets, he was a 600 boy who had ops watching his every move. Even though he was getting more known, L.A. Capone did not live like some flashy celebrity with his business all over the internet. When it came to his dating life, there was not much out there. Some people guessed he had girls on the side, but nothing solid ever came up. He did not move like a rapper who wanted every relationship posted, tagged, and turned into gossip. Reports say he was private and reserved, especially about romance. He was rarely seen with women in public, and he did not sit in interviews bragging about hookups. Most of his energy seemed to be locked onto music, the gang politics around him, and trying to build a name in a city where a lot of young rappers never lived long enough to drop even one full project. On the music side, L.A. Capone was pushing hard. He started dropping songs and showing up in videos with other drill artists. Tracks like Play for Keeps, Round Here, Shooters, Murder, The Gat, and So Loud turned into street anthems. His videos on YouTube and clips on social media made him a rising name. His Instagram picked up more than 100,000 followers, which was big for a teenager coming out of South Shore, and 600. In those visuals, you saw weed smoke, street corners, gang signs, and that drill energy that made fans feel like they were right there on the block. He never got the chance to put out a full mixtape while he was alive, but he was working on one called Separate Myself. After he died, his people dropped a project called King LA that carried his voice forward and reminded everyone why the streets had started checking for him in the first place. The week everything went wrong did not start dark. Leonard had just turned 17, and his mom still had that homemade birthday cake sitting in the kitchen. She had baked it herself because he did not like store cakes. In the apartment, it still felt like a normal celebration for her only son. He was also waiting on a package that he was excited about, a new polo hoodie. He called his mom before the shooting just to ask if it had arrived yet. That is the kind of call teenagers make when they think they have time. He never made it back home to open that package. He never got the chance to go for his driver's license, never got to show up at prom. Those simple milestones were right in front of him, but out on the streets his name was already tied up in serious gang beef, and some of his ops were not thinking about birthdays or hoodies when they looked at him. By that time, L.A. Capone was not just a rapper, he was deep in a long-running war. On the other side were sets like the Gangster Disciples in areas such as Tuckerville, STL, and EBT, plus 051 Young Money, a crew connected to the Mickey Cobras. In his music, he even dissed dead ops, like when he said Shondale how the hot shit feel, calling out a gangster disciple who had already been killed. That type of disrespect is regular talk and drill, but it raises the pressure in real life. The gang world around him saw him as more than a kid with a mic. He had already been shot once about a year before he was killed. He survived that earlier hit, went through surgeries and recovery, and came back moving again, but it showed that people were willing to slide on him. When you are in a war like that, every alley and every studio exit can turn into a danger zone. On September 26, 2013, L.A. Capone hit a South Shore recording studio near 71st Street and Stony Island Avenue. He was doing what he usually did, laying down music, locked in with a friend at the session. Around 6 in the evening, he wrapped up and got ready to leave. His homie said Leonard walked down the alley toward the corner, looking for their ride and trying to figure out where the car was parked. To them, it probably felt like just another night. Record, step outside, hop in the whip, and head out. But someone else had other plans. On that alley near the studio, his ops were already in motion, and they were not coming to talk. As Leonard walked through the alley by the studio, an assailant came up on foot and opened fire. Witnesses and police records say he was hit in his right thigh and lower back, with bullets that started low and traveled through his body. Some accounts say about 4 shots were fired. Whoever pulled up on him did not give him a chance. They caught him in that narrow space, a place that should have been a simple path from the studio door to his ride, and turned it into a kill zone. At that moment, nobody had the full story. People just knew the young 600 rapper had been shot again, and that this time looked worse. On social media, the news spread quickly, and eyes turned towards South Shore to find out if he was going to make it. An ambulance rushed L.A. Capone to Northwestern Memorial Hospital. For a minute, there was hope. His mother heard he was alert and talking when he first got there, and she tried to hold on to that. She had been through this with him before, when he was shot around the same time the previous year, and survived after serious treatment. This time, while she waited at the hospital, she heard her own mother let out a loud screech down the hall and understood before anyone said the words. Doctors told her he was losing too much blood. They managed to stop it twice, but the third time his body could not keep fighting. Around 8:30 that night, he was pronounced dead. Back at home, the birthday cake sat on the counter, and the polo package he had called about was still on the way. His mom walked through the apartment cleaning, throwing things away, trying to move so she would not have to sit still and think too hard about life without Leonard, about how to live in that space with the empty chair at the table. News of his death hit the city fast. Lil Durk, who had been his friend for more than 5 years, went to Twitter and posted, "Get well Lil Bro," when he first heard about the shooting. When the word came back that Leonard had not survived, Durk followed up with another message, "Rip Lil Bro," making it clear to the whole drill world that LA was gone. Other rappers and fans started posting his songs, sharing clips from Play for Keeps and Round Here, turning the comment sections into memorial walls. On the gang side, people started pointing fingers. Since he was a 600 BD, most people believed the hit had come from ops tied to the gangster, disciples, or from 051 Young Money, who were already in a heavy dispute with his set. In the streets, those are the kind of rumors that stay alive even when no one has gone to trial yet. In this case, those whispers ended up being close to the truth. For a while after the shooting, The case sat as another unsolved Chicago murder of a young black man tied to gangs and music. But behind the scenes, detectives kept working. They kept talking to people, trying to pull apart what happened in that alley. Almost a year later, in August of 2014, police stepped up and announced that 3 men had been charged with L.A. Capone's murder. All 3 were connected to his ops. 2 of them, Michael Mays and a teenager named Saki Hardy Johnson, were tied to 051 Young Money, a set with Mickey Cobra roots and a long-standing beef with 600. The third man, an older guy named Miko Buchanan, was linked to the role of driver in what cops called a tail car. When prosecutors spoke in court, they said these men had confessed to their part in the shooting and laid out a story that matched what people on the streets had been saying about rival gang members plotting on L.A. Court documents and news reports broke down the roles. Prosecutors said that on the day of the murder, Hardy Johnson and Mays went and got a gun before rolling toward the studio. They described how there were 2 cars involved. The lead car carried the gunman who would sneak up on L.A. Capone. The second car, the tail car, was there to run interference and insulate the lead car from police, basically acting like a shield if squad cars tried to pull up. According to the state, Buchanan admitted he was driving that tail car and that he pulled into the alley and watched the shooter walk up behind Leonard and let off shots from what he thought was a 40 or 45 caliber handgun. All 3 were charged with first-degree murder. The message coming from court was that this was not some random drive-by, but a move tied to ongoing beef between 600 and 051 Young Money. In the years that followed, the case moved forward piece by piece. Mako Buchanan, known as Rockhead, was the first to get sentenced. While he was already locked up on other charges, he ended up confessing his role. In late 2016, he pled guilty to 2 counts of murder in L.A. Capone's case. A judge gave him a 45-year sentence, including a mandatory firearm enhancement. He was credited with some time already served in the county jail and then sent downstate to Menard Correctional Center, a place that also housed other Chicago names like Rondo No. 9 and C-Die, both tied to 600 and both serving time for another murder. For Mama Capone, that first guilty verdict and sentence felt like the start of the justice she had been fighting for since the night her son died. She went online and wrote that she knew he was in heaven smiling down because they had gotten some justice for him, adding 1 down, 2 more to go, and tagging justice for L.A. The second big move came when Michael Mays caught his sentence. After being found guilty for his part in the murder, he was sent off to state prison with a 24-year sentence. Records showed he was transferred to Stateville Correctional Center, with projected parole and release dates deep in the future, far past the usual age that people consider their youth. Prosecutors said Mays had admitted to getting the gun and rolling with the others to the studio that day. On social media, other rappers reacted to the convictions. Lil Reese, another Chicago drill figure, commented online that dudes were snitches and calling for people to stomp out Lil Mick and Rockhead, showing how personal and messy this case was in the eyes of people still moving around those same sets and blocks. For L.A. Capone's mother, Mays' guilty verdict meant 2 down, 1 more to go, as she put it in another post. The last name on that list was Saki Hardy Johnson, the teenager from 051 Young Money the internet knows as Lil Mick. Prosecutors said he gave a statement admitting he got a gun before going to the studio and that he sat in a parked car ready to run interference if the police showed up. On top of that, other reports and street talk connected him even closer to the actual shooting, identifying him as the assailant who walked up on L.A. Capone in that alley and fired the shots that took him out. In February of 2017, after years of court dates and waiting, he was found guilty in connection with the murder. Mama Capone jumped back on Instagram and wrote that she was tired but never gave up, saying she had fought hard to get justice like she promised and celebrating 3 guilty verdicts and justice for LA. For her, that meant her son could rest and so could she, at least when it came to the courtroom side of the story. But for the streets, the name Lil Mick carried a different kind of weight now. He was the teenage op from 051 who had helped turn that beef with 600 into a full-on war story. After his conviction, reports said that Lil Mick received a long sentence and that he ended up in Menard Correctional Center, the same prison as Rondo and the Die from Team 600. Photos and updated mugshots of him started circulating, along with talk that he was serving a 60-year stretch. In the gang world, that detail hit hard. You had a young BD rapper dead at 17, his 2 close homies in prison for killing a cab driver, and the teenage op who allegedly shot him also locked up for decades. Whole crews were missing key members. Whole blocks lost sons to graveyards and cell blocks. The way people on the internet talked about it, That one hit on L.A. Capone had changed the fate of multiple sets at once, and Lil Mick's name sat right at the center of that storm. Even with all three men convicted, the story did not tie itself up with a neat bow in the streets. The beef that led to L.A. Capone's murder did not disappear just because the state put numbers on people. 600 still carried scars. 051 Young Money still carried its own losses and its own hate. Fans kept streaming King L.A., watching old videos of him with Rondo and other 600 members yelling GDK to the camera. Meanwhile, people online kept bringing up Lil Mick as a teenage Chicago assassin from 051 who had turned his ops block into something close to a war zone. By the time this next part of the story starts, Lil Mick is no longer just a young hitter from the Southside Alley. He is now defendant appellant Seki Hardy Johnson in black and white, fighting for his life in the Illinois Appellate Court. A jury had already hit him with a first-degree murder conviction on an accountability theory for the killing of L.A. Capone. The judge had stacked 45 years for the murder with another 15 years for a firearm enhancement, turning it into a 60-year hit. For a 17-year-old, that is basically a life sentence. So Lil Mick takes it upstairs, arguing that the trial was dirty, that cops used other dudes' words against him, that his lawyer messed up, that the jury was not properly warned, and that one juror might have been biased from the jump. He is not just fighting the guilty verdict, he is also trying to crack that sentence number down or blow it up completely. The court goes back to where it all started, September 26, 2013. Leonard Anderson gets shot twice in an alley. His mom tells the court he was a rapper, L.A. Capone, heading to the studio that day to work on music. A cop responds to the scene, finds Anderson on the ground, and asks him who shot him, but Anderson says he does not know. The detectives collect shells, a bullet, blood, and a phone from the alley. The appeal judges look hard at how the detectives built the case on Lil Mick. On August 21, 2014, they bring him to the station, sit him in a recorded interview room, and read him his Miranda rights. Detective Halloran admits he did not tell him the room had audio and video on, but at that time he was not required to say that. In clip after clip, the jury at trial had watched Lil Mick talk. He admits he knew Mays and Buchanan. He knows where the studio is. He tells them he heard younger gang members talk about the shooting. Later he goes further, telling detectives that on the day of the murder, he was with Mays and Buchanan when Mays got a call saying Anderson was at the studio making a song about them, and Mays asked if he wanted to ride on that. At first he says he did not go, but later he admits they linked up with an older female, Amanda Fitch, at a gas station. He hops in her car, calls it a trail car, and explains that his job and Fitch's job was to keep the cops off the shooters, doing some funny stuff if the police got behind them. He says he hears shots while they wait, and after the hit, Fitch drops him off at Washington Park. On another recording with different detectives, he uses words like look out and agrees that he was accountable, even though those words first came from the detectives. By the time the appeal comes, the judges are clear on one thing. The strongest thing tying Lil Mick to this murder is not some shaky eyewitness, it is his own mouth on those tapes. One of the wildest parts in this appeal is the bathroom scene. The detective takes co-defendant Mays to the restroom that is just a few feet from Lil Mick's interview room. The door's locked, but Lil Mick slides down on the floor by his own door and starts talking to Mays through it. The interview room camera is still rolling. On the video, only Lil Mick's side is clear. He tells Mays they should work together, put the blame on Buchanan, basically trying to line up a story. At trial, the state plays that too, to show he was plotting, not some innocent kid caught up by accident. On appeal, Lil Mick says his lawyer should have tried to suppress that bathroom recording because it broke Illinois eavesdropping laws. He argues that this was a private conversation between two locked doors and should never have been taped. But the appeals court is not buying that. They say he is already in a police station in an interview room that is wired, talking loud enough to be picked up. In their eyes, there is no reasonable expectation of privacy there. They also point out that the only clear voice is his, and the confrontation clause only protects you from other people's taped statements being used when they are not in court. Here, it is his own words that hurt him. Even if the clip was some kind of technical violation, the judges say it would still be harmless in the big picture, because his full confession in the main interview is way more powerful than a short whisper about blaming Buchanan. Lil Mick also tries to use the big Supreme Court case, Bruton, which says you cannot use a non-testifying co-defendant's confession against a defendant in a joint trial. He points to one clip where detectives tell him they talked to Mays and Buchanan, and that those talks are what made them come talk to him. He says that is basically telling the jury those other guys snitched on him. The appellate judges compare this to another case where cops said they learned about 2 additional offenders after talking to co-defendants and made it obvious those dudes pointed at the defendant. Here they say the detectives only mentioned that they spoke to Mays and Buchanan, and that is why they are now questioning Lil Mick. They do not share what Mays or Buchanan actually said. The prosecutors do not lean on that part in closing. The court says this is allowed as part of explaining how the investigation moved forward, not as proof that co-offenders blamed him. Since Bruton kicks in when a co-defendant's own words are used as real evidence against you, and that did not happen here, the appeals court rules there is no confrontation violation, and even if you treated it as error, they say the confession clips where Lil Mick breaks down his role as a trail car and lookout are so strong that any small mistake would be harmless beyond a reasonable doubt. Another thing Lil Mick complains about is what happened when they picked the jury. Under Illinois Rule 431, the judge is supposed to ask every juror if they understand 4 key ideas: that the defendant is presumed innocent, that the state has to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, that the defendant does not have to prove anything, and that if he does not testify, they cannot use that against him. The record shows the judge did cover the first 3, and even reminded the jury at the end of trial that they could not hold his silence against him. But during jury selection, the judge never asked them if they understood and accepted that last point. That is a clear mistake under the rule. Even so, because the defense did not object or raise it in a motion for a new trial, the appeals court only looks at it under plain error, which kicks in if the evidence is super close. When they look at the whole case, they see the confession backed by physical evidence, the alley location, the number of shots, the gang context. They decide this is not a close call where a small jury instruction slip might have flipped the verdict. So they call it error, but not plain error, and leave the conviction standing. Lil Mick also points at one juror, James Carter, who said his wife was a corporate lawyer and he knew some defense attorneys. When asked if anything about those ties would stop him from being fair, he said yes, but later promised he would judge all witnesses fairly and listen to all the evidence in an impartial way. The appeals court says that mix of answers is not a clear red flag, and since he then swore he could be fair, it was not unreasonable for defense counsel not to dig deeper. That kills the ineffective assistance claim on that point. Where the appeals judges finally pump the brakes is at sentencing. The trial judge had gone through different factors, Lil Mick being 17 but more experienced than some other teens, the way the hit was planned out, his attempts to shift blame with the co-defendant, and his juvenile record where he did not finish probation right. The judge said his degree of participation was 100 from the time they were on the street to when Anderson was in that alley. The judge also talked about studies on how 17-year-old brains are still developing, but decided Lil Mick was too deep in the streets, too calculated. Then the judge added something that did not come from this trial at all. She said that Anderson came out holding a phone, that there had been a call right before, and that miraculously he steps out of the studio at the exact time all the cars pull up, and then he is executed. The problem is, none of that was in the record for this case. No witness at this trial said there was a phone call that lured Anderson outside. The state even admits on appeal that the judge might have mixed in facts she heard in the separate trials of Mays or Buchanan. The appeals court says that is a big issue. A judge can use their experience, but they cannot build a sentence on facts the jury in this case never heard. Because the judge repeated the phone call story and clearly used it to paint the murder as a cold setup, the appeals panel decides she relied on improper aggravation. That is enough for them to vacate the sentence and send the case back down for a brand new sentencing hearing. Since they are already sending it back for resentencing, the appeals judges take a moment to give some game to the next judge on how to handle a juvenile facing a de facto life sentence. Under cases like Miller, Reyes, Holman, and Buffer, they explain you can still give a juvenile a life or near life sentence, but only if you really walk through youth and its attendant characteristics. That means things like his age and immaturity at the time of the hit, his home and family situation, how deep he was in the planning and the pressure from older gang members, whether he understood the system and could work with lawyers, and what his real chances are for rehabilitation. In this case, the original judge talked about some of that while deciding the 15-year firearm enhancement, but it is not clear she fully applied all those youth factors to the whole 60-year number. The appeals court does not say the sentence can never be that high. They just make it clear that, on remand, if the court wants to put a juvenile like Lil Mick away for what is basically life, it has to do it clean. Only using facts from this record and really thinking through whether this young gang member is truly beyond saving or not. Even years after the alley hit, L.A. Capone's murder kept haunting Chicago. In late 2023, a channel dropped a full documentary on what happened to the Play for Keeps rapper. They opened it with that old school line, "They smiling in your face. All the time they want to take your place, the backstabbers." The whole angle was simple but brutal. Was L.A. Capone betrayed by his own gang? The doc painted L.A. Capone as the one who was supposed to be the next big thing out of Chicago, but still trapped in gang politics that do not care how famous you are when ops slide or when your own circle starts moving funny. Once that documentary went live, the comment section turned into a hood barbershop. People were not just sad, they were angry, and they were pointing fingers at the gang culture around Lay's death. One viewer wrote, "Damn, I knew Nizgas and his own clique set him up. Wow." Another dropped, "Lee was going to be the biggest out of Chicago." That heartbreak mixed with street logic, where everybody expects some kind of backdoor once you start shining. Then somebody else snapped on the rumors saying, "Where the fuck did y'all hear Lil Durk set him up? Y'all be reaching too much." The streets were clearly split between raw conspiracy and people tired of wild allegations, but one thing was clear. Nobody believed this was just a random alley shooting anymore. For them, this was what happens when fame and gang ties collide. While fans argued online about who really betrayed L.A. Capone, Lil Mick was sitting behind bars trying to rebuild his whole identity. To the system, he was the teenage Chicago assassin who helped turn his block into a war zone. To the internet, he was the name on the paperwork for LA's murder. But inside the walls of Cook County Jail, something very different was starting. This is where the story stops looking like a regular drill beef and starts turning into a struggle between gang life and faith, between the set and something he now calls the Ummah. In a 2023 interview, he is asked to introduce himself and talk about his upbringing, then asked what pulled him toward Islam. Lil Mick explained that it did not start with some big speech on the outside. It started in Cook County Jail. Locked up, cut off from the block, he kept bumping into Muslim inmates. One brother in particular took time with him, explained the basics, and showed him the path. Day by day, the noise of the tear got mixed with talk about one God and about a prophet who changed his people. For a kid raised in gang politics and beef, that was a completely different type of structure. While other dudes argued about sets and bodies, he was hearing about a different kind of squad, one that did not move off revenge and clout. To make sure the audience understands, the interviewer breaks it down for them. He explains that becoming a Muslim is not just saying I am done with the streets in some vague way. You have to take the Shahada, the declaration of faith. That means saying you believe in one God and that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the final prophet. Once you take that Shahada, all your previous sins are wiped clean and you are supposed to start fresh. If you say you are Muslim, you are supposed to leave gang life completely. No halfway in the set, halfway in the masjid. You are supposed to join the Ummah, the global Muslim community, where loyalty and brotherhood are stronger than any gang. In his words, the Ummah is a line that runs deeper than any block, and that is the line Lil Mick now claimed. They discussed how Maynard Correctional is a prison built back in the 1800s, old, worn down, and not built to any modern standard. The interviewer says his heart goes out to all incarcerated believers, and he calls the United States prison system a modern form of slavery, especially for black people. Inside that kind of cage, Lil Mick says he already knew a little about Islam, but Maynard is where he really dug deeper. He was going through a lot emotionally, and instead of turning to more gang drama, he turned to the religion. He says that as he learned more, he started to find himself in Islam. That is where he officially took his Shahada on April 3rd, making that the day he says he stepped out of the old identity and into the new one for real. When asked where he learned it from, Lil Mick does not talk about YouTube or some big stage lecture. He mentions a classic Islamic book called Toward Understanding Islam, a simple breakdown that helped him get the basics. There are also talks of Malcolm X, who learned about Islam in prison too. Malcolm went from a street life to becoming Muslim behind bars, then came home and became a walking source, powerful and wise, using his voice to uplift his people. For a young gang member sentenced on a murder case, that blueprint of going from convict to conscious leader was heavy. It showed him that even a man with a criminal past could flip his whole script. When he talks about what Islam did for him personally, Lil Mick does not brag about being perfect. He just explains the shift. He says the religion made him humble. It made him see life differently. He felt like he finally had something better to live for than street stripes and gang rumors. Instead of just being known as the hitter from 051 Young Money, he now had a purpose that was not tied to a block. That new mindset did not erase his case or erase the pain outside, but it gave him a new way to get through the day. On top of that, he says he is enrolled in an Islamic course and is waiting on his books to land on August 19th or August 20th, which shows he is not just claiming the label Muslim, but actually trying to study and understand what that means. He is asked to give a message. Lil Mick puts it straight. He says the gang lifestyle is not worth it. He explains that Islam gave him the strength to step back and really reflect on his life. Being locked up showed him who really cared about him and who just liked saying his name when he was free. Some people stood by him, many did not. He realized how quickly people take life for granted, how fast they move on when someone is gone or locked. Prison forced him to think deeply about loyalty, about who is truly riding for you when you cannot do anything for them. From his point of view, a lot of the day ones vanish once the gate closes. The conversation then gets a little wider. The interviewer says that black men in America should not be at war with each other, and he mentions that Lil Mick had brought up something like the Willie Lynch syndrome. When he is asked to break it down, Lil Mick explains it as a mindset where black people are divided against each other. Instead of building together, they are pushed and trained to hate each other, to fight each other, to keep each other down. He says it should not be like this. He hopes people find purpose and identity and choose what is right instead of letting that divide rule them. For someone who once helped turn his own block into a war zone, that is a big shift in how he sees the world. Before the appeals, before the documentaries, the war connected to Lil Capone was already spilling into the county, and Lil Mick's name was right there in the middle of it, even when he was not on camera. Back in 2017, King Von was locked up in a holding cell when things jumped off. In leaked footage, he is standing there cuffed, just another body in the bullpen, until he walks over to the corner of the cell and another inmate helps him slip those cuffs off. Once his hands are free, Von does not waste a second. He squares up on another inmate and starts swinging, punching on him over and over while everybody else watches that fade go down in real time. It only lasts a few seconds before the sheriff deputies rush in, shut the whole thing down and clamp the cuffs back on him. But those few seconds say a lot about how serious this LA Capone war still was, even behind steel doors. The man catching that beatdown is not some random. According to Chicago's Rarest, the victim is a dude named 051 Freaky, tied in with the same 051 Young Money crew that was already at war over Lil Capone. The same crew that Lil Mick claimed on the streets. The reason for the attack is grimy Chicago politics at their core. Freaky had a tattoo on him that said "Fuck L.A. Capone." That ink was not just a drawing, it was a straight up disrespect to a dead rapper and OTF affiliate. King Von, who repped the other side, was not letting that slide, especially when 3 men from 051 Young Money had already been convicted for that murder and hit with decades in prison. So when Von sees that tattoo in the county, he is not just fighting one man, he is swinging on everything that came with that L.A. Capone Alley hit, including the name of Lil Mick. That 2017 holding cell footage was not the only time King Von went viral from jail, and it shows how dangerous that world was for anybody tied to these sets, including someone like Lil Mick sitting on long time. Around that same period, another clip surfaced, this one from leaked police body cam. In this video, Von is talking to officers and flipping the script completely. He tells them he is gay so he can be moved to a different part of the jail and get protective custody. One officer even asks, "Because of your sexual orientation, you're requesting protective custody, is that correct?" And Von calmly answers, "Yes." Then he starts clowning to make his point, saying, "They could be Christian, they got a problem with gay people, bye Lil Josh," and he blows a kiss and adds, "I'ma fuck you too, they tried to let me sock they duck." It shows how he is ready to say whatever he has to say to get to a safer cell. Because in a place full of ops and rival sets, where 051 Young Money and OTF enemies might end up in the same pod, surviving the tier can be just as tricky as surviving the block that Lil Mick once helped turn into a live war zone. Fast forward a bit and King Von's legal trouble moves from Chicago jail footage to a bigger case down south, while Lil Mick is already sitting on that heavy LA Capone conviction. In 2019, Von and his close friend Lil Durk were both arrested over a shooting and robbery in Atlanta. The charges were not light. They were hit with accusations like criminal attempt to commit murder, aggravated assault, and possession of a firearm. For a rapper already known in the streets, those charges fit right into the image of someone living what he rapped about. But the case did not end the way a lot of people expected. Last year, All those charges against Von and Dirk were dropped because of what the state called prosecutorial discretion. On paper, they walked away from that Atlanta situation, while Mick was still locked on a de facto life sentence off that Chicago alley. In the streets, though, it just added to Von's legend as someone who always seemed to be one step away from either a major win or a deadly loss. The same type of knife-edge Lil Mick had walked before everything crashed. That loss finally came in Atlanta too. On November 6th, 2020, King Von, whose real name was Davon Bennett, got into it outside an Atlanta hookah lounge. It was not some calm disagreement either. It turned into a dispute with fellow rapper Quando Rondo's crew, and once again guns came out. In the chaos that followed, Von was shot and killed at just 26 years old. Later on, Timothy Lil Tim Leaks was charged over his murder. For a lot of fans, it felt like the same energy they had seen in those jail clips. The same beef over disrespect and rivalries that started with hood names like Lil Capone, 051 Young Money, and OTF had finally caught up with him in the open, far away from Chicago but still wrapped in the same street. Politics that had already sent Lil Mick deep into the system. While Lil Mick was sitting in prison trying to flip his life through Islam and appeals, Von's story closed with more gun smoke and another case file. Even with Von gone, his presence did not fade out, just like the LA Capone case, and Lil Mick's name never really left the conversation. But in Chicago, the war does not stop just because one rapper dies in Atlanta or one teenage assassin takes his shahada behind the wall. Fast forward to May 2024, and the internet drags his name back into the gossip cycle again. This time, it is not about religion, it is about old gang ties. Leaked jail footage hits the net showing Chicago rapper Rondo No. 9 and Lil Mick in the same spot. In the clip, Mick can be seen passing something to Rondo and then sitting on top of the same table where the Team 600 rapper is seated. People start saying they are still kicking it together behind bars, like nothing ever changed, but Rondo pushes back hard, denying that he is still hanging with 051 Lil Mick, especially given the LA Capone situation and all the politics around that. That moment shows the split clearly. Outside, fans want to connect everything, but inside, old alliances are shaky, and everyone is fighting to control their own name. By September 2024, the legal side of Lil Mick's story takes another twist. Word comes out that, allegedly, Saki Hardy Johnson won his appeal in the LA Capone murder case. According to what is being said, his original 60-year prison sentence from 2017 got thrown out, and he was resentenced to 20 years instead. He has been incarcerated since 2014, which means a serious chunk of that new time is already behind him. For a kid who once looked at spending the rest of his life locked away, that change is massive. It does not erase his past or the pain tied to Lil Capone's name, but it shows how the story of a teenage Chicago assassin, a gang war, and a jailhouse Muslim is still being rewritten year after year, both in courtrooms and on the streets that made him. Out here, stories like Lil Mick's do not really end, they just change form. The faces get older, the names switch from street nicknames to case numbers and inmate IDs, but the energy stays the same. A kid picks a side, the block heats up, shots ring out, and years later people are still arguing online about who really did what and who really backdoored who. The internet breaks it down like a movie, but for the people inside those names, the credits never roll. The block, the county, the joint, the masjid, it is all the same timeline stretched out. Some see Lil Mick as the teenage gunman whose name got tied to a famous rapper's death and a bloody set of Chicago politics. Others only know him as the quiet man in khaki, talking soft about Islam, discipline, loyalty, and telling young dudes to leave the gang stuff alone. Same person, two different images, locked into one body. He once helped turn his side of the city into what felt like a live war zone. Now he is telling people, keep striving and trying to stand on something different, while the war he came from keeps spinning without him. So now we hand it over to you. When someone like Lil Mick says he changed, do you believe it? Or do you think the streets never really let go? Do you think Lil Capone's death was a straight hit by the ops? Or is there still more to that backdoor talk people push online? If you grew up around this kind of gang pressure, what would it take for you to walk away for real? Let us know what you think in the comments box below. And if you liked how we presented you this video, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe for more.